What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, September 14th. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And I want to start on out here. RBN has another donation drive going, and I know it's starting to look like we're always asking you for money, and yes, we are. Money for whatreallyhappened.com, money for RBN, and we do need it. But there is a third little issue out there I'd like you to be aware of. On RBN's homepage under RBN Updates, there's a link that goes to a GoFundMe page for one of our fellow RBN hosts by the name of Tin Spencer. And a while back, unfortunately, he had a seizure. And after calling the paramedics, his ankle was horrifically broken, either being put in the ambulance or somehow during transit. Just really messed him up. And they've had to do multiple skin grafts. They haven't successfully taken. He's feeling the lack of quality in American medical care. And unfortunately, now they're saying that because they've botched up the broken ankle so badly, he's looking at a below-the-knee amputation. And you can go to the GoFundMe page and read all about it. But basically, they're in a world of hurt because of Obamacare, because of the declining quality of medical care, increasing costs. And again, I empathize with him, and he's a fellow RBN host. So if you got any left over, take the empties to the store, whatever. And again, I apologize because it always looks like we're always asking for money. And that's actually a very hard thing for me to do because I know that you are all struggling to get by just the way that Claire and I are. But in the case of Tim, we need to make that extra effort because he's literally, quite literally in a world of hurt there. All right, getting on to the news. We're going to lead off with Hillary and her Sour Grapes tour, although somebody wrote on in and said it should be the Sour Puss tour. Either one will work. And she's out there. She's trying to make herself, keep herself in the public spotlight. She's already said she's not going to run for the White House again. I wouldn't bet a nickel on it because she's going to all this effort to protect her name value. And I don't know that that necessarily has anything to do with the financial return because the book sales are not good. But she just wants to be out there and she wants people admiring her. And she's continuing to go on the attack and people are starting to keep count. Right now they're saying in her book she's blamed 41 different entities and individuals and there may be more yet to come. James Comey was bad to her, Matt Lauer, Netflix, Putin, fathers, husbands, male bosses, and boyfriends, and women who didn't vote for Hillary. It's just this nonstop whining cry fest about how she got cheated out of the election by the American people. But it doesn't really work that way. The American people vote for the candidate that makes the most sense to them. And yes, I understand. A lot of you are deeply disappointed in Donald Trump. So am I. But things would be worse under Hillary. But I got to tell you, Trump is a reminder that voting for the lesser of two evils is still evil, and it's a stupid way to run a country. All right, let's grab a couple of phone calls here. Bob in Missouri, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. I was telling you the other day, I appreciate the forum. You're accurate on many things. But, the one thing that's kind of bugging me right now, they're trying to get a whole new war going in the Middle East, northern Iraq to be exact, or Iraq, I guess they don't pronounce long I, Iran or Iraq. But anyway, the Kurds are buddy with Israel and has been for many a year. And Israel, they're wanting to carve out northern Iraq because all the oil's up there and whatnot. And, that's going to be a base for Israel to, to be able to fly in and out of and kind of surround Iraq and that. And Erdogan in Turkey, which is a very strong militarily speaking country, is just having fits over it, which I don't blame them. And Iraq government that's in there now apparently isn't just a pure puppet for the good old U.S. of A. Is having fits over it too, and well, they should have. And see, that's why I was saying the other day to you that they're trying to soften up all these countries except Israel's, Greater Israel proceedings. That's not a lot of our trouble is in the Middle East. I don't really have anything against Israel personally, but they just make themselves a bad taste in people's mouths, and it's uncalled for. Have you heard about it?
Oh, yeah, I've been hearing about it. In fact, one of the articles we're talking about today is how Netanyahu is fully on board with, carving a new Kurdistan out of Iraq. And, of course, it's easy for him to be generous with other people's property. And you're absolutely right. The Kurds have been allied with Israel. It would give Israel a point of power projection. It would cut Iraq off from their major oil resources. And so it's a very difficult situation. Now, the Kurds, again, going back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Kurds do have a right to vote themselves independent. And unfortunately, we have seen everybody come down on various sides of that law. When Crimea voted to make itself independent, the U.S. refused to recognize the election results, and therefore, by default, Russia stole Crimea. We're seeing just flip-flops on that very policy. But if you're going to stand on the basis of law, the Kurds do have a right to secede because they have not been treated very well by the Iraq puppet government ever since the end of the Iraq War. So we'll see what's going to happen there. But yes, you're right. This could lead to yet another war in Iraq.
I just wonder, a whole new war. I could see them wanting to be independent, but it looks like they want, especially if Israel's on board with them, they want to really take over, and that's why, if it's just going to be, like you were saying, they just want to have an independence post, that Erdogan wouldn't be so up in arms over it, and I don't blame him. I just wonder what Trump's going to do, because behind the scenes, we'll probably never know, but he's probably going to give them a green light or whatever, and it's going to start a big war. And we will lose people. It won't be one soldier here, one soldier this and that, but it just sickens me to see how it's going with them. And I thank you for the forum, Mike.
All right, well, thank you very much. And yeah, it does seem that everybody is still on board with this war wagon. We know that Israel's agenda is to take the larger Middle Eastern countries, which represent a challenge to its political supremacy, and break them up into little tiny pieces. They want to eventually do it to Iran. They're already starting to do it with Iraq, just carving off chunks here. But like I said, it's very easy for Netanyahu to be generous with other people's property. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and we're going to go back to the phones and talk to Tony in Puerto Rico. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. I guess a little boring talking about the petrodollar. Everybody knows why the United States is in the Middle East for oil. In dollars. Okay, I just want to change the subject. I was watching your documentary on the Currency Act. My question is this: can a colony have a legal right to print its own money? And I have another question. Another question: when is the United States getting back to the moon or manned flight to Mars?
Well, getting on to the first one, basically at the time King George passed the Currency Act, the colonies were printing their own money. And so they always had an adequate supply of it. It was issued by the government. It didn't accrue debt. And when Ben Franklin was over in Great Britain representing the U.S. interest, this being before the Revolution, representing the colonies to the British court, and he saw the incredible poverty that you had all over Great Britain. And everyone was asking him, what do you do about your poor and out-of-work people in the colonies? And he said, well, we don't have that problem. We're just printing up our own money. We always have an adequate money supply, and that means there are going to be adequate numbers of jobs, and everybody's able to work and better their lives. And the bank people in Britain were in a panic, because that's not how it's supposed to work. You're supposed to borrow your money from the banks. They just print it up out of thin air, but you have to borrow it at interest, and it's how they harvest wealth from you. So the bankers...
Yeah, but I understand, Mike, but my question is this. Does the colony have...
Hang on. Yes, the colony did have a right, and that was... They saw that they had that right, but the bankers lobbied King George III to pass that Currency Act, which said, no, you don't have a right to issue your own currency and script. You will borrow all your money at interest from the Bank of England. And in just 2 years, the colonies were driven down to the same poverty that you saw at the lower classes in Great Britain. And that was what really the main impetus for the revolution. It's not taught in schools anymore because the smart students stand up and say, hey, we're back in that same system again under the Federal Reserve. But that was basically it.
And space flight to Mars, what do you think? Someday?
It's hard to, someday, it may not be the United States, though. I know that China and Russia are teaming up. They're talking about going back to the moon. That would be very exciting. If China has really succeeded in making this fuelless drive work, then all of a sudden sending men to the outer planets, the game has changed. Instead of taking 2 years, it's just going to take 2 months to get out there. And that makes it a lot easier to deal with what's going on there. All right, so I would like to see a manned expedition to Mars. I would be very cautious. Now, when Apollo went to the moon, there was a concern among some people that even though the moon was waterless and airless, that there might still be some kind of a germ that could be brought back to Earth. And that's why they had the Lunar Receiving Lab was built for the astronauts and for the samples to be held in isolation until they really knew what was going on. And then when Apollo 11 came back from its landing and it was bobbing around in the ocean, the astronauts were getting seasick, and they just opened the hatch right there. And that was kind of just completely erased the entire protocol. They stuck to it the rest of the time. They had them walking in with gas masks. The original plan, though, was there was going to be a plastic tunnel from the hatch of the command module to that little portable Airstream trailer that they were all going to in, and that was just all abandoned at the last second. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and grab another phone call from Sherry in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael. Whoops. Yeah, I'm off speaker now. I was just listening to the show. I have a cassette tape. I have an old Magnavox, and I record. I was just listening to the show from a couple of days ago. I think it was, you're talking about Judith Curry and how they wanted to throw her in jail because she dared to stand up and say global warming isn't connected to Irma and Harvey and all this stuff.
Yes.
And I got to thinking, and now maybe this has been talked about before, but I want to get in early because the show sometimes gets cut off for me at the end for some reason. But anyway, it's the way they program it. But global warming, okay, this connection between like smart appliances, and I got to thinking of other things, smart monitors, smart cars, smart gas pumps. You could have smart toll roads, smart hotels. I mean, there's not an end to it. And we're supposed to have all this stuff so we won't make a carbon footprint. And it's supposed to, save us a bunch of money. And what is now, you ought to buy it because it's good for you, will become a must-buy, to assure this turn away from global warming. Do you think this is connected? Because if you look at it that way, there's a huge financial investment in it for people who are trying to push this agenda. It both controls us and financially bleeds us at the same time,
Well,
do you think there's a connection?
Well, I don't know.
They can insist it.
I don't know about the smart appliances. They're going to market them on any device they think will get people to buy the product. That's what the purpose of advertising is for. Yes, they're calling it climate change now. They used to call it global warming, and then they sort of had to stop that because the world wasn't warming. And now they're saying climate change like that is something caused by humans, which is ridiculous because the climate has always been changing. It always will. Independent of the actions of humans. And if you really go back all the way to the 1990s and you look at all the warnings and predictions the global warming people were making, none of them happened. They've got a batting record of 0 on all of this. And then if you go to the bottom of my ClimateGate page and you see all these quotes from people like even Al Gore himself saying, of course we're having to lie to you. We need to get you to go along with our agenda. And so that's the attitude. They're not going to tell you the truth. They're there to sell you an agenda.
Well, look at the scope of the agenda. The scope could be that if you don't use these things, you're going to be fined a whole bunch. If you don't use these hotels, if you don't use these roads, if you don't use this gas at this station here. In other words, we can't own anything because it's going to have a carbon footprint. I mean, that scope. That it's a good thing that we've started early saying this is a bunch of baloney. Most people know at this point, but I just got something from someone in North Dakota. It's an article I want to read about how global warming isn't global warming or climate change. They had to change the name because it's getting colder. How are they going to explain it, But, most people know. But, we could be circumventing this horrible catastrophe of having to be made to buy all these smart products. Do you think it could be that big in scope? And then that's one of the purposes of trying to
it
push
wouldn't be the first
change?
time. It wouldn't be the first time. If a company comes out with a product that people don't actually want or can't be convinced they want, they get the government to mandate it. Bluetooth headsets for your cell phones. Those are made mandatory in many states. Mandatory vaccination is another good example. So I would not at all be surprised if they start saying every home must have a fire extinguisher. I'd actually be on board with that one. As you sink deeper into fascism, corporations will make whatever products they want to make. They may not be very good, but they turn to their friends in the government to mandate you must own these. And
I think it's possible. I'm just wondering how I'm going to get out of it, but I will. I'll just do without is what I'll do. At my age, it might be easy, but I don't know.
Well, I have that advantage, too. Claire and I are getting on in years, and we don't expect to be around all that much longer. But, we've become decadent with our technology. They're putting computers in places they really don't need to be. Like coffee pots and everything. And I've got an old press now I'm making my coffee with.
Me too.
I mean, this office here is obviously very high-tech. There's a lot of computers and equipment and everything. You walk out of my office, and Claire's office is the same way. It's her music studio setup. You walk out. The rest of our house, it definitely looks like it's a throwback to the 1900s. We even have candles and kerosene lanterns down there, which are part of our tsunami hurricane kit. When I'm done with the radio show, I want to walk away from all the high tech. I don't want to be looking at flat screens. I want to get on out, get some exercise, and look at the real world. And I think it has gone too far where everybody thinks that whatever product you've got, it'll be made better by a computer. That's not necessarily so. It makes it more difficult to use, more difficult to mess around with. Look how many people have trouble programming their DVRs and their cable boxes. And that's
why I like my old-fashioned method. They haven't been able to do anything about. Will you just tell us, Mike, when you hear about it, just like you do, because we sure rely on it. Whenever you hear about something going awry because it's too tech, just let us know, and I'll pass that on to my friends and family.
All right. Well, I'll keep my eye out, and again, complexity is definitely a killer. A lot of pilots. Yeah. A lot of test pilots found that out the hard way. I mean, today's aircraft cockpits are pretty much simplified. The worst was the F-104. That had so many dials and switches, the pilot would have to literally reach around behind the cockpit and feel behind the seat and feel on the wall for certain switches. And that complexity actually led to a lot of crashes because there were simply too many dials and buttons. Now the Air Force and aircraft companies have gone back the other way, and aircraft are definitely someplace where a computer does make the experience a lot better. But again, I don't need a computer in my coffee pot. I don't need computers in my shoes. I don't need computers in my underwear, and that's just the way it is. We're going to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Sherry. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, let's get all the way back to Hillary Clinton. She's out there on her sour grapes or sourpuss tour or whatever other name you want to come up for, because that's really what it is. I should be the president. It was stolen from me. You are all betraying me. You are all to blame. And not too surprisingly, the crowds at her book signings are fairly small. A lot of people are showing up in order to challenge her on certain issues, face to face, like what happened to Seth Rich, where are the 33,000 missing emails. Hillary does have security, and they have been instructed anybody asking any kind of an embarrassing question is to be ejected forthwith. And apparently things got a little out of control when she was doing a book signing at a New York store, where it got just a little bit rowdy. But the sales of the book are not very good, and again, she's out there autographing the books and charging people to come to the events. I don't think it's going to really work all that well. I think, like her political campaign, she's not caring about the people who actually show up as much as she's creating a media opportunity to keep her face on the TV sets of the American people, which tells me that despite her comment about never running for president again, she's thinking about running for something. That's the sense I am getting. And she did say she was going to remain in politics, just not run for president. Well, it looks like she's going to be running for something else. And she could always change her mind down the road. If Donald Trump continues on the path that he's on, where he is basically destroying his own credibility and image, assuming we survived 2020 to have elections, Hillary might step in again. Now, she's lost, obviously, a lot of support among the Democratic rank and file over the rigging of the primaries against Bernie Sanders. And the Democratic leadership, frankly, are just sick and tired of her. But that never stopped Hillary Clinton. So she's out there using this book tour to get all these interviews on out there. And last night on CNN, she was out there saying it's time to abolish the Electoral College. It's an antiquated system. It allowed Trump to just take the election and because I won the popular vote. Well, we know she didn't actually win the popular vote. When you subtract out the millions and millions of illegal immigrants who voted illegally, and all the dead people who were voting. Remember the big joke down in Florida. Let's hope all those Hillary voters older than 106 that are on the voter rolls are able to reach safety. And then there's that new stink up there in New Hampshire where about 6,000 people came up from Massachusetts, showed their driver's license, registered to vote, and then voted for Hillary and then skedaddled back into Massachusetts. And a follow-up investigation showed they had been lying about moving to New Hampshire. They never got a follow-up New Hampshire driver's license. And so, yes, there was massive election fraud going on. Hillary didn't win the popular vote. She didn't win anything. She was trying to steal it, and she failed. Absolutely. Now, over at the Russia probe, things appear to be falling apart because Mueller and his people have just gone after all these people, and they can't find anything. They're not finding any evidence. The investigation is just falling apart, and Mueller is still trying to focus on finding some way to bring Trump down, even as all of the Clintons' crimes are common knowledge throughout all of Washington, D.C. So they went after Michael Flynn, then Michael G. Flynn, the son of Donald Trump's former national security advisor. Then they went after Donald Jr., and then now they're going after, I mean, they're just going down the list here. It's a fishing expedition. And so far, all of the information has not found, there's no fire there. There's not even any smoke there. Paul Manafort's released all of his documents. There was nothing in there about collusion. The corporate media actually came out and said the word donate was in Manafort's documents. No, they weren't. It's just the media making it up again. Now, you would think after all the problems Hillary had with her private server, that people would be leery of that. But apparently, as it turns out, Imran Awan was playing fast and loose with the network in the house. More when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we're talking about Imran Awan, former IT aide to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who kept him on her payroll right up to the day he was arrested trying to flee the country. and he's already been charged for fraud, but the investigation is now looking into possible potential espionage. And apparently, Imran Awan had his own secret server, and when he was working as an IT aide, he was routing data from numerous House Democrats to that secret server. Police got suspicious about all the traffic. They requested a copy of the server earlier this year, but Imran Awan provided them with a falsified image of the drive designed to hide the violations, and the police realized they were looking at an altered archive, and that's what triggered the ban from the House network on February 2nd. Now, the secret server was connected to the House Democratic Caucus, an organization chaired by then-Representative Xavier Becerra, and police informed Becerra that the server was the subject of an investigation. They requested a copy of it, and authorities consider the false image they received to be interference in a criminal investigation. And that's exactly what it is. Imran Awan lied to authorities. And apparently, going on even further, Imran Awan, this server, was automatically backing up its data to Dropbox, which, by the way, it is forbidden for government files to be shared on systems like Dropbox because it's too easy to get on in and look at them. So that meant that even after being banned from physically going into the Capitol building, into the House, that Imran Awan was still getting files and data forwarded to him from this server. We don't know when it was actually turned off or shut down. So at some point, I think he's going to make a deal, and he's going to turn on Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, in turn, may turn on Hillary Clinton. Now, we know that Imran Awan's wife appears to have made some kind of a deal because she voluntarily returned to the United States of America. She'd gotten away clean. She was back home. She had a bunch of money with her, and apparently she came back, and that tells me a deal was made. Now, do you remember Martin Shkreli? We mentioned this a little bit briefly yesterday. Martin Shkreli was this former pharmaceutical executive. He got hold of the rights to this medication and shot the price up by thousands and thousands of dollars. And he was convicted of fraud last August, and he's awaiting sentencing. Well, apparently this same Shkreli literally posted a reward that he would pay anybody who could procure a lock of hair from Hillary Clinton $5,000. And a federal judge basically has now revoked Shkreli's bail. So he is going back to jail. And that was a very reckless thing for him to be doing. Now, if you can find somebody has dropped some hair, great if it's got the bulb from the scalp, because then you've got the DNA. But what hair is really good for is you can find out what drugs and medication they've been on, because there's always a trace amount in the hair, and as the hair grows, it's like this little microscopic timeline of everything that you've been taking or been given. Now, the Justice Department has ordered Russia Today to register as a foreign agent. And it's going to worsen U.S.-Russian relations because the American version of Russia Today is actually run out of America by Americans. But the Department of Justice is basically now on the warpath to where anybody who is putting out any news that contradicts the official version, they're a foreign agent or they're a hostile intelligence service. These are just the top players, and they're going to work their way down the ladder. And you know what's really amazing? They're out there screaming about Russia Today has to register as a foreign agent. Sputnik has to register as a foreign agent. Not a word about AIPAC, which is the biggest agent for a foreign government operating in our country. And there is absolutely no question that they've tampered with our elections, that they're influencing Congress, but they're not required to register as a foreign agent. And it just really doesn't make that much sense. Now, the European Union came on out with their own website, which is supposed to be a website that operates against Kremlin disinformation. I have a feeling it's probably not seeing a lot of traffic, but the European Union is basically saying, a member of the European Parliament, this is another step toward a new Cold War. And of course, that's what our military-industrial complex wants. They want a new Cold War. That's a war where they don't actually have to go on out and fight. They don't have to do the bloody bit, but they get to take all the taxpayers' money and they get to make all these weapons and play with all their toys and have parades and air shows and everything. That's what a Cold War is. The danger of a Cold War, of course, is somebody slipping up and turning it into a hot war. And there were a couple of near misses back during the 50s and the 60s. The movie War Games is based on a true story that actually happened. American planes have accidentally dropped fully operational nuclear weapons. None of them went off, thankfully. But it is, when you have these kinds of powerful machines out there, it really, you have to be very, very careful and just not get used to this idea that sooner or later we're just going to have to accept a nuclear war, because I won't. Getting on back to Hillary Clinton and the Crybaby Tour. I think I like that name. She's now out there trying to claim that Democrats have a media disadvantage thanks to Breitbart News. And basically she's out there saying that the rise of conservative news is a threat to democracy. They've got dedicated propaganda channels like Fox News, and it's got outlets like Breitbart and, you know, crazy InfoWars and things like that. Now, that's not what I recall from last year. What I recall from last year is the corporate media were fully on board with Hillary Clinton's campaign. Remember the Podesta emails that got leaked on out? They were having these meetings with the owners and CEOs of these corporate media outlets who were just standing by Hillary Clinton. They wouldn't report any of the negative news coming out about her, and they were relentless in their attacks on Donald Trump. And now here's Hillary out there saying, well, the corporate media is the reason I lost, because they've got a conservative bias. Turning over to the war zones here, Russia is in fact using Syria as a real-world testing ground demonstrator for its new aircraft. And apparently they have now deployed the MiG-29 SMT multi-role combat aircraft to Syria for the first time. And so it's out there doing its things. Meanwhile, we're getting more and more comments on this recently exposed Pentagon $2.2 billion pipeline flooding Syria, getting arms into the hands of these rebels. And it looks like it's still ongoing, and it looks like the U.S. is still casting around for some way that they can turn this around, because Syria is back in control of 85% of Syrian territory, and ISIS, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, whatever you call them, is losing ground every single day. They've been kicked out of Deir ez-Zor. So at this point, this is a major defeat for the United States. And maybe in the spirit of not being seen to be defeated, we already know that the U.S. is going to say, well, huzzah, huzzah, we got ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But the real agenda has been to get rid of Assad, and he is definitely staying. So what will the U.S. do? Just haul off and say, to heck with all this make-believe stuff, we want Assad gone, and do a decap strike on him? It's not like the United States government is really fooling anybody anymore with all this talk about humanitarian war and horrible tyrants we have to save people from. They're really not fooling anybody with that. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri, has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Sochi. And they're doing a lot of talks about relevant issues, including military cooperation. So it looks like Lebanon is now pivoting toward Russia. And that's going to be making Israel very, very nervous indeed. Now, Pakistan has kicked out the medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, they've ordered them to stop work and leave the impoverished tribal areas that border Afghanistan. Now, it's been a very volatile, violent area. There have been a lot of attacks on the Doctors Without Borders facilities and personnel, but they really don't want to go. Local officials are saying that Médecins Sans Frontières provides essential health care facilities in Fata, an area with some of Pakistan's poorest health care and lowest illiteracy rates. But for some reason, the government of Pakistan is saying it is time for them to get on out. Now, we don't know yet what's going on. It may be that they're concerned about all NGOs being covert fronts for something, or they may be aware that that area of Afghanistan could possibly erupt into violence. I mean, with all the new U.S. surges into Afghanistan, if they actually start winning, where do you think the Taliban are going to go? They're going to go across the border into Pakistan. Now, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are basically getting ready to invade Qatar in punishment for its independent foreign policy, which irritates the Saudi and UAE ruling families. And it's also seen as basically a threat to U.S. interests because the U.S. has military bases on Qatar, and it's also a threat to the global energy economy because Qatar is one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas. Now, China backs a United Nations human rights chief demands for justice in Yemen, and of course the U.S. and the Saudis object to that. But again, it's another one of those situations where the U.S. is trying not to look like they're being defeated. See, about 5 years ago, there was an intervention in Yemen. The U.S. went on in, covertly destabilized the government, kicked out the elected government, and put in a new puppet ruler. And the people of Yemen decided they didn't want to live under the puppet ruler, so they kicked those people out. And they're saying that they have their own government they're trying to put on in. The U.S., going through Saudi Arabia, because the American people are fed up with war, are basically pounding on the people of Yemen, literally starving them into submission, into accepting their U.S.-approved puppet ruler, otherwise described as the internationally approved government of Yemen. Well, I'm sorry, but there's nothing in the United Nations documents that says other nations have any kind of a right to approve of your government or not. If that's the government the people have voted for, that's the government they should have. Of course, the U.S. has a different attitude. All the way back in 1973, when they were overthrowing Salvador Allende in Chile and replacing him with the dictator Pinochet, Kissinger came right on out and said, you know, the issues are just too large to leave to the voters because Allende was a socialist and they wanted another fascist in there that was going to strip mine the country for the benefit of American corporations. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey there, Mike. I just heard you talking about the Hillary Weiner tour, and Mark Dice went off on that today. If you check out his website, he's got some great stuff about talking about the book itself. But also be reminded, I remember RBN had on their website the actual audio clip of one of the mainstream media networks that saying we're doing our best to help her out in her presidency to give her the Oval Office.
Yes.
So, you know, keeping all this stuff in mind, they have zero credibility of being fair and unbiased. They are very biased, and we should all abort mainstream media. I know I did a long time ago. I keep an eye on them just to see what they're saying, but they have zero credibility and truth, and so that's why you guys are doing a great job of what you're doing, and I do appreciate you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the kind words. And, yeah, I remember seeing that video. Right now, the only thing that's keeping the corporate media running, or especially CNN, it turns out CNN actually pays the airports to have their videos in the waiting areas. And I imagine they probably have the same deal in a lot of other venues where, like post office, you'll go in, there's the view screen with Big Brother's propaganda for today. But again, most Americans have now become very skeptical about anything that officials say, and that's a good thing. That's a very healthy thing, I think. Anyway, thanks for the call.
Well, she poked the eye of the people that were actually backing her. Mainstream media was helping her. Now she's blaming them.
Yes.
Geez, this woman has no loyalty to anyone. Amazing.
No, she's loyal only to herself, and she will not hesitate. If, in fact, Imran Awan does make a deal and Debbie Wasserman Schultz is going to turn on her, there are going to be more dead bodies out there. There are going to be more dead bodies under strange circumstances before this is over. And Hillary won't hesitate to have that done.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Now, going on back to the email scandal, there was a story we ran a while ago where the NSA claims they have the deleted 33,000 emails. And they offered them to the FBI when it was under the control of James Comey, and the FBI, when it was under the control of James Comey, said, we're not interested. And now we're finding out, of course, that Comey wrote his justification for exonerating Hillary Clinton before any of the evidence came in, before any of the people were interviewed. It was just directed from on high. This is going to go nowhere. Mahi dictum est. So moving on here, Netanyahu says he will meet Trump in New York next week. During a visit to New York, he will address the United Nations General Assembly on September 26, where he'll be out there screaming about Iran and the Palestinians and Al-Qaeda and how you should all go kill them for us. And he's going to meet with Donald Trump and presumably hand him his traveling orders, as it were. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to the show. And okay, we lost Steve in California here. I am getting a message though. Apparently people responded to the top of the show request for assistance for our RBN host Tim Spencer, and apparently a lot of people have already sent in some money, not a lot, but obviously everybody's going to help. So Tim and his wife wanted me to thank all of you for what you're doing there. Now, getting on back to the war zones here, apparently there are these new gun and bomb attacks in South Iraq. At least 50 people have been killed, 80 more injured in these gun and car bomb attacks in the southern Iraq city of Nasiriyah, and basically saying some of the people were Iranian pilgrims just visiting. And they were brought under attack. So it does look like more destabilization is headed on there. If the U.S.-backed Kurds do try and go independent, it's going to result in another war in Iraq. And here you have the puppet rulers of Iraq are supposed to be beholding to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government is now siding with their lifelong enemies, the Kurds, to break off a piece of their country. I can understand why Erdogan is upset. Turkey and the Kurds have been at each other's throat for a long time. The Kurds have been trying to find a home all over the Middle East. At one point they were up against Iraq and Iran. They got caught in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war. So it was just a huge mess here. As I mentioned earlier in the show, the Israeli Prime Minister backs Kurdish independence in Iraq. And like I said, it's very easy for Netanyahu to be generous with other people's property. If he thinks the Kurds ought to have their own home, why doesn't he bring them into Israel? Now, the House adopted measures yesterday to block the sale of commercial aircraft to Iran. We're not talking warplanes, we're not talking military, we're talking passenger liners, cargo planes, that kind of stuff. Representative Peter Roskam, Republican of Illinois, offered 2 amendments to the 2018 government spending package that would specifically prohibit the use of funds to authorize financial transactions for the sales and prevent the House of Foreign Asset Control from clearing licenses to allow aircraft sales. Now, what is this basically all about? This is a violation of the P5+1 deal. Because the whole idea of the P5+1 deal is Iran would shut down its nuclear technology. They would rely on foreign sources for the fuel rods for their nuclear power plants. And the U.S. would stop all the sanctions. And what has the U.S. been doing? More sanctions and more sanctions and more sanctions. And so the Iranian leader's senior advisor on international affairs has said that this U.S. stunt to block the sales of aircraft undermines the P5+1 deal. And that's exactly what it's intended to do. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about Iran. And there is this headline story over at the Weekly Standard about how the Trump administration has finished reviewing its Iran policy, and now we wait. And they're basically saying there's probably going to be a change coming down the road, and Trump is probably going to signal what that is during his address to the United Nations General Assembly next Tuesday. But we're already getting an indicator of what's going on, because apparently Trump held a little bit of a news conference on board of Air Force One this morning, in which he was out there saying that he was tired of what Iran has been doing. Well, what has Iran been doing? Iran has complied with the P5+1. The only real threat from Iran is that they do not subscribe to private central banking. Other than that, they mind their own business. They're in America's crosshairs because they're in Israel's crosshairs. Iran has done nothing to warrant an attack and invasion. For that matter, that was true of Iraq, true of Libya, true of Syria, true of Afghanistan. All of these wars that we have seen over the last going on 20 years were naked, unprovoked wars of aggression. Now, the U.S. military is looking at North Korea, and they're seeing that it looks like their missile launchers are being prepared for another satellite, another missile test, which North Korea has already announced. But they're trying to make it look like it's a big deal and North Korea is being provocative. Russia tested an ICBM, a real ICBM, reaching all around the world from Plesetsk a few days ago. Nobody makes a big deal about that. The U.S. is always firing test missiles off from Vandenberg or out here at the Pacific Missile Test Range. That's not considered provocative. It's only when North Korea does it that everybody says, oh, my goodness, he's coming to get us. No, he's not. He's trying to prevent the U.S. from coming to get him. And that is a big difference. Now, apparently, Donald Trump has blocked attempts by a Chinese state-owned company to acquire an American semiconductor manufacturer on national security concerns. This drew a complaint from Beijing. And the company in question was Lattice Semiconductor Corporation. This is a publicly traded Oregon company. And it was going to be acquired by a Chinese-owned Canyon Bridge Fund. And Trump decided it could endanger the U.S. government's use of sensitive projects the company produces. This according to a statement from the Treasury Department. And so once again, you're seeing a very chaotic, inconsistent foreign policy, where Trump, on the one hand, needs China to help get North Korea in line, and then at the same time turns around and blocks Chinese acquisition of American companies. Now, I don't know what this Lattice Semiconductor Corporation makes, and maybe there's a good reason to keep it under wraps. Actually, I think we gave away too much of our technology to other countries over the last 30 years. That's why the manufacturing is now over there, along with the manufacturing jobs. But again, China's getting these mixed signals between our behavior in North Korea, our behavior in the South China Sea, and now this. Now, remember, we keep getting all these calls from all these, how should I describe them? Poison the Wellers, good name, about how the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain had to be stopped still. They were paralyzed by Russian technology, and that this really did represent an attack. Well, the Navy has now come on out with their official conclusions of what's going on. And the Navy has admitted it was liable for the collisions. So during a congressional oversight panel on Thursday, Admiral William Moran, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, said the combination of the hectic pace of military operations along with the military's tight budget led to the McCain collision as well as the crash of the USS Fitzgerald last June. And Moran said standards have dropped. And he said the Navy is at fault and there's no excuse. So I was right. Apparently in the rush to get these ships out to sea, they're being turned over to commanders who are simply not trained up to know how to behave on the ocean in peacetime. I'm sure they're really good when it comes to outright war. But there are rules out there to protect everybody when you're sailing around in peacetime, and the rules were clearly not followed. There's a lot more to boating than just buying a boat. Claire and I, this was a few years ago, Claire and I have a friend, and her husband had passed away, and so she was dating again, which was good. And she was dating this guy who had a sailboat, and he was all proud of it. And our friend said, you got to come on down. We're going to go out and do some day sailing. And because Claire and I have ragsetter experience, we came on down. This guy had bought this sailboat, and he didn't know a thing about it. And literally, we were out at the breakwater, and he succeeded in basically bringing down the rigging on the sail. The jib boom came loose, and he had no idea what he was doing. And technically, I committed an act of mutiny. I said, "I'll take care of this. Just sit down." And I got us back to the docking, to the pier. And yeah, there's a lot that you got to learn before you should be given the helm of a ship. And the Navy's admitting standards have dropped. There was just a big rush to get these bodies onto these ships and get these ships out there in the war zone. And the people who were in charge of these ships did not know the rules of the sea lane. And very clearly, both the USS John S. McCain and the USS Fitzgerald thought they were going to dart around the front side of these tankers and cargo ship, and that the tankers and cargo ship would simply slow down and make way for them. Well, they can't. Those huge ships take 5 miles to bring to a stop. And that's why they get those top slots on that hierarchy of who's got the right of way. So it kind of makes you wonder what other areas of expertise are these Navy crews deficient in? Are they really as good as the TV commercials make them out to be? Or are they all out there on this ship full of weapons and they're not really all that well trained? They can't be trained any better than the command crew is. And if the command crew is not up to standards, you've got a real problem. Now, we have family who was in the Navy, technically still in the Navy, was on command path, decided to go another direction. And they told us some stories about just how weird things got in the new Navy and how there were people in positions of command who clearly should not have been there. So this is someplace where the Navy and indeed the entire Pentagon, they got to clean up the mess. If we're looking at more serious wars in the future, we have to have weapons that are inexpensive and don't break down, handled by people who know what they are doing. The collision of the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain have sent an image to the world that the U.S. military is one giant flustercluck. And that's not going to be conducive to winning a global war. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Getting on over to the economic news, Trump is now back on his tax cut. And he's basically saying the tax cuts are only going to be for the lower tax brackets. And he's saying rich people may actually have to pay more. And I can imagine already there's an intense lobbying on that. I think taxes are too high just in general. On everybody, it's too high for what we get back for it. Americans need to ask, are they getting value for money for all that money? Because over your lifetime, government will be the single most expensive thing you ever pay for. Are you getting value for that money? Are you getting the service? Are you getting what you tell the members of Congress that you want? Or is the money just being sucked up into this giant war machine so that we can have incompetent sailors darting around the ocean in these Aegis destroyers, disrupting traffic patterns? We need a cash for clunkers law for the government. Take our current government over to the junkyard, we put it in that little crushing machine, and it crushes it on down to this little tiny steel coffee table. And then we all get a check for $15,000 each to go on and buy a smaller, more efficient government. I think there's an idea whose time has come here. This little diplomatic tit-for-tat is really getting very, very childish. Apparently, according to the U.S. State Department, Russia has now basically removed the reservation on parking spaces used by consulate staff outside the mission buildings. They used to have signs saying reserved for American consular officials. The signs are gone. Anybody can park there. And if those parking spots are full, then the consular staff has to go find someplace else to park. And it's petty and it's trivial. But again, the U.S. started all this back under Obama. But it's looking a little bit childish here. Now, 6 big banks, including Barclays and HSBC, are partnering up to create a new cryptocurrency. And basically, Bitcoin, Blackcoin, and Ethereum are looking at the rise of these cryptocurrencies, and they want to create a new cryptocurrency of their own. And what they want to do is take advantage of the blockchain technology, and are calling their digital coin the utility settlement coin. Not exactly euphonious. Apparently, this was actually developed back in 2015 by UBS. They want to have a commercial-grade blockchain system by next year. The problem with these banks and their own cryptocurrency, they're going to handle it the way they handle any other currency. It's just created out of thin air and loaned out at interest. Now, speaking of Bitcoin, it has crashed 35% in China. Beijing is saying they will close all the local exchanges within China by the end of the month. So they're in a little bit of trouble. Venezuela just stopped accepting U.S. dollars. They're saying it's only temporary, but they're sending a message. Is this the beginning of the collapse of the dollar as the global reserve currency? And remember, we're hearing these stories about how both the IMF and the United Nations next January are going to say we need a new reserve currency that is not tangled up with that dollar. Because nobody sees the dollar as stable in the long run. Everybody sees how the Federal Reserve is just printing more and more money to cover Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. And inevitably, that makes the dollars that are in circulation worth less and less and less. Over in Anaheim, California, they've declared a state of emergency over the ballooning homeless community along the Santa Ana River. And by declaring it a state of emergency, they're clearing the way for the forced removal of hundreds of people living in a landscape dotted with trash and used hypodermic needles and lacking toilet facilities, and you can imagine what that is like over there. The homeless, you can't look at all the homeless people in this country and see that our economy is in recovery. You can't look at all the homeless people in our country and say that we've got a government that is actually working to take care of all of the American people. I was shocked the other day to find out I had been understating the number of homeless on this island. It's 8,000, not 4,000. And it's not like they can go anywhere else. They're not going to be able to walk back to the mainland. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Alex in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't hear you that well. Now I do. I was calling because yesterday I heard Judge Napolitano on Fox say that it wasn't really a crime what Comey did as far as leaking the memos to his friends to leak them to the press. Did you hear him come out and say that?
No, I didn't, and unfortunately, I think in this instance, the good judge is in error.
I do too. I was basically calling to say that I think that he's being censored. I don't think they're going to let him say what he really wants to say. Ever since he came out with whatever it was where they fired him, but then rehired him like a week later.
Yes.
I heard him say that, and I heard him say something else about it was that Comey could also come up with the determination as for Hillary's email usage before the FBI questions her. That was another thing he was saying.
Well, that definitely... yeah, I mean, that definitely was an issue where Comey was literally creating the foundation to exonerate Hillary before he ever looked at the evidence or took any testimony. And again, there is that story where the NSA went to Comey at the FBI and said, we've got those 33,000 missing emails, and Comey just said, we're not interested.
Yeah, what are the people of this country going to do as far as a justice system where we enforce the law? It doesn't apply to the deep state, to Hillary Clinton. I mean, are we going to allow that, do you think?
Well, the only way to not allow it, again, is resorting to violence, and I'm not ready to go there. We're just going to have to wait it on out, and I'm convinced that the federal government of this country is going to collapse like the Soviet Union did, and we need to just be ready to decide for ourselves what nation will replace it, and not wait for some carpetbagger to come on in there and hook us back on the old swindles.
That's right. A real good reporter with CNN, believe it or not. He was Australian. He had his head shaved, and he was actually in the Middle East during our wars there.
Yeah.
And what he reported is that basically that Iran, since we destabilized all the countries around, they're the last standing power, and the United States just can't handle it. That was one of the biggest errors made, which I think I'm not for any of the war over there.
Okay, your phone is breaking up here. Can you make sure your mouth is really close to the microphone?
Yeah, yes, and it's raining. But anyway, basically what he was saying is that we destabilized so much of the Middle East that Iran's the only superpower standing. And
yeah,
we just that's what it is.
That makes sense. I mean, Iraq is hamstrung, Afghanistan is hamstrung. Yeah, Iran is the only country in the Middle East outside of Israel that is still pretty much intact.
That's right. And that's what happens when our government goes to war without thinking it through. And that's what we did.
Yep. Well, again,
greed and money.
Again, the plan was that there was going to be a war in Iran in 2008. They were going to be the last of the Middle East nations to be conquered and have their natural resources shackled to the dollar. But it's not going very good. And again, barring the unforeseen, like outright invasion or decapitation strike on Assad, the U.S. is suffering a defeat in Syria, their biggest one since Vietnam.
Good. Don't need to be in Syria. It's bad for the taxpayers that we're paying for it, and we're not providing services for our people, and we're going to war. But I also know that there's so many people that are in their 60s that are basically living in their cars.
Yes.
Like in Florida.
Yep.
It's very sad. Because the inflation is really showing up with the rent rates. It's extremely high.
Alex, we're going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Here we're going to go right back to the telephones. Keith in Montana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to give you a slight correction on something you said there. Not that you were wrong or anything like that, but it was in quote about Iran hasn't done anything wrong. Of course, that's in our eyes. Remember when Iran was found to have a military base in the Syrian area, that it really peeved off the Israelis. And, of course, the difference to that, though, is because even the Times of Israel admits that Syria and Iran have a mutual defense pact between each other. But the reason I called is I sent you a video earlier from Twitter there of the 100-plus U.S. Arms trucks, and we're not talking about little Toyotas, but these are actual big trucks loaded with weapons headed into Syria.
Yeah.
And this goes in line, though, with what the Times of Israel also said to Trump about how he cannot differentiate between Hezbollah and Hamas. And if you remember, Hamas was funded by Olmert, as Olmert admitted that Israel actually pays Hamas, and then Hezbollah, of course, is supported. But the primary thing I got out of that entire story here was the Israelis were saying that Iran was building missiles, and so I would claim then from that Israel would then claim that these missiles or anything coming out of Gaza would have been directly attributed to Iran. You see what I'm getting at?
I see what you're getting at there, but again, what Israel was actually saying was that Iran actually had factories making missiles in both Syria and Lebanon, and again, not a shred of proof. We're just supposed to take their word for it, and already we've seen both governments say that's a complete and utter fantasy. Iran is not building missiles inside our countries. But you're absolutely right. I mean, right. Israel's trying to stir this pot as hard as they can, and that's why we're seeing all this stuff about how North Korea is getting the nuclear technology from Iran and from Russia, and they're basically lumping together all the bad guys at once to try and create this idea that there is this axis of evil out there. That we're all supposed to just automatically hate. But again, we've been lied to so many times. There's
another point of it too. Remember, Israel has admitted to making over 100 airstrikes into Syria. They're targeting the SAA over there.
Yes.
But I find something really interesting, though, because Russia has made the statement that should anything happen to Iran, it's game on.
Yeah, I know they've said that. But, you know, from Israel's point of view, as long as it's not their children and their money being spent,
right.
You know, sure. It's like I said about the Kurdistan. Netanyahu finds it very easy to be generous with other people's property. And Netanyahu's goal is not for Israel to go to war against Iran, but for the United States to go to war against Iran. And Israel will just stand on back and watch these foolish people kill each other off, and then basically go on in the aftermath and buy up what they can for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, I forget what Middle East Monitor or something like that, but it was a statement from Iraq. I can't remember the prime minister there, but he showed video of the Republican Guard from Iran just totally devastating that ISIS. And this, again, is what we see. The U.S., or through Trump, said that he's going to end this CIA covert program in Syria. And, of course, we can see, like, even today, with the amount of arms going in there, it's not over.
No. That's definitely a big whopper for Donald Trump.
And that's why with Russia today announcing that new MiG-29, whatever it is like that, now going into Syria there, which is one of the most advanced fighters, you know, it's like Putin isn't dumb. He knows what's going on.
No, absolutely no question. No question about it.
Anyway, I just wanted to clarify that because, you know, they up to 5,000 Iranians of their military in this so-called base. But of course, that base might be their center of operations for attacking ISIS. You know.
Yeah, very could very well be. And again, like Russia, Syria has asked Iran to come on in and would like the U.S. to leave. Keith, thank you for the call. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Let's take another phone call before we get back to the news. Chet in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha, Mike. Yeah, I'll be very quick. I just wanted to point out that that excerpt from Hillary's book regarding 1984 it made me feel, I don't know if you've ever seen Louis Blatt, the comedian.
Oh, yes.
He gets bombarded by so much stupidness. He does this thing where he just can't take anymore. Well, that's what happened to me when I heard her interpretation. It's double speak about double speak.
Yes.
And it was mind-blowing. Listen, I'm not going to take a lot of your time. I just wanted to remind your listeners that the primary divider of sides here is globalism versus nationalism. And saw this idiot on Tucker Carlson last night who was trying to get the vote for non-citizens, and his rationale was really weak. But, he's attempting to, in a petri dish, not only encourage illegals to vote, but make it legal for them to vote, which is, absolutely contrary to everything we stand for as a country. And finally, I just wanted to say that, as I said, this is my second call. First time I made it clear that, I'm a lover of America and the Constitution. I agree with what you said yesterday. We got to have at least 13 of those amendments. But it's a very, very unique document. It makes us what we are. And without it, we're just like, Guatemala. So, let's just keep our eyes focused on what's important, and that is, saving this country of ours.
Well, doing our best. We're absolutely doing our best. Anyway, Chet, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are empty, 800-313-9443. And I have to tell you right now, we are seeing a full court press on the propaganda, and I'll give you two extreme examples of what I mean by that. Now, Monday night, they had the Miss America 2018 pageant. I didn't tune in and watch it. I've sort of outgrown beauty contests and things like that. But apparently, it was loaded with questions and innuendo denigrating President Donald Trump. It caused a pushback on social media. And apparently, when they were asking the questions for the final 5 contestants, it was all political. And people were saying on Twitter, the 5 minutes I watched was all about politics. Shame on the judges, and stop it. Now, Miss Texas Margana Wood was asked how she believed Trump handled the violence that erupted in Charlottesville. And then she went on to say, well, it was a terrorist attack. Well, we don't care what she really said. But obviously these women, they're feeding these questions to sell them to the public. Miss New Jersey, Caitlin Schofield, was asked her opinion on Confederate statues. She said, let's just move them into the museums. No, I think we ought to leave them right where they are. And then one of the contestants was literally asked if Trump colluded with Russia. It was a dead serious question. And to her credit, this particular Miss America candidate, Davis, said, right now, we'd have to say innocent. There's not enough information, which is bang spot on. But, I mean, they're just using every possible vehicle to push the agenda. And another one, believe it or not, is in the latest Superman comic books, where somebody actually sent me scans of the pages there, where Superman is saving illegal immigrants from angry Americans. And the angry Americans are being portrayed as all these skinhead neo-Nazi. I got an American flag bandana. I'm shooting the endangered species because how dare they tell me what I can't shoot. And just, right to the walls portraying Americans as the bad guys and the illegal immigrants as the good guys, protected by Superman. Now, again, I've outgrown reading comic books, but it's another example. They're using anything they can find, anything at all they can find to push the propaganda that traditional Americans are bad people, they should be made to go away, and make way for all these people coming in from all these other countries. That in turn dovetails with another story that we got here, where former Tory Chancellor George Osborne is out there saying he will not rest until he has Prime Minister Theresa May chopped up in bags in his freezer. It's getting very, very colorful language out there. But apparently Esquire magazine ran a profile piece of Osborne, who's now the editor of the Evening Standard newspaper. And apparently he's made that comment to more than a few people. Now, it isn't that he really means it. It sounds good. It's a good soundbite. It's going to get him attention. It obviously did in this case. But it does feel like all of these governments are getting badly factionalized. They're not running smoothly. They're caught in this battle between the globalists and the nationalists. And I think whoever was planning for this campaign for globalism literally was not expecting there to be this nationalist pushback. They just thought it was just going to sail on through to completion and everybody was going to be happy. But I don't think a one world government is a very good idea at all. It will certainly be history's most tyrannical dictatorship. They're already out there trying to crush down any observation or comment on how it was being formed, like the fraud over the when pigs fly flu. Human-caused global warming was another issue that was being used to push along the one world society. Open borders and all the problems that's caused. They didn't really think it all the way through, or they thought, hey, as long as Soros has got the money to spend, I'm willing to go ahead and make a mess of things in Europe and the United States. Now, Angela Merkel is starting to get a little bit nervous because according to the latest polls in Germany, the nationalist AfD populist party is polling where they're going to get enough votes to enter parliament. And AfD is very much, they want Germany to close their borders to migrants. They want to leave the European common currency and end all sanctions against Russia. And apparently they're being propelled by voters who are just infuriated at Angela Merkel's decision to let over 1 million refugees into the country since 2015. And it's caused all of these problems: out of control rape, crime, contagious diseases. Now, yesterday we reported that over in Catalonia, the police had been ordered to confiscate all election materials, the ballot boxes, the ballots, to try and basically head off this referendum. Now they've upped the ante. The government of Spain is threatening to arrest any mayors who are in favor of the referendum for independence for Catalonia. So it's getting really ugly and sticky. And again, Madrid is in the wrong. As a signature to the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, unfortunately, we're living through an age where governments are increasingly lawless or see themselves as being above the law. Expediency trumps everything. We're willing to break the law because we serve a higher, more noble purpose. That's called the true believer mentality. It's gotten us into so much trouble throughout history. Yes, what we're doing is illegal, but we're going to do it because we're serving a higher purpose. And then that higher purpose never materializes, and you're stuck with the aftermath of whatever it is that you did, including war. Now, Jean-Claude Juncker is apparently in serious trouble because more and more of the members of the European Parliament and the leadership of the European Union member nations, they're just willing to openly come on out and insult him. And apparently an EU chief came on out just saying that they doubt him. They doubt Jean-Claude Juncker's plans for the EU. He can't deliver. He can't deliver what he's promising. And more to the point, what he's promising is basically a further consolidation of power in Brussels over the EU's economy, various other issues. And a lot of the EU are very frustrated by all the nitpicking, meddling, tinkering regulation that the EU has already done on how produce has to be a certain size and can't be allowed to be bigger or smaller, and it's resulted in a lot of food wastage. And of course, for Germany, the sanctions against Russia have caused tremendous financial harm. Same thing to France. So apparently, a German member of the European Parliament has basically come on out and said that Jean-Claude Juncker's vision for the EU needs to be stopped right now. It's described as frightening and an attempt to save the exploding Brussels bloc, and it has to be stopped. Basically, Juncker is doing a power grab. He's doing a power grab. And apparently an Austrian member of the European Parliament interrupted Jean-Claude Juncker in the middle of a speech saying Europe doesn't work. And it's time for the member states to get their sovereignty back. So it's really starting to come apart. It's really starting to come apart. Now, over at the New York Slimes, they had an opinion piece titled, "Hungary is Making Europe's Migrant Crisis Worse," which wagged their editorial finger at Hungary for its inhospitable attitudes toward migrants, while also attacking President Trump for his scandalous example on immigration and dissing Britain's Brexit vote in order to leave the European Union. In other words, the New York Slimes is pushing that globalist agenda. And Hungary's spokesman, Zoltán Kovács, issued a written reply to the New York Slimes editors saying the newspaper is presumptuous in trying to teach Europeans how to solve their migrant crisis, especially when they're demonstrating that they just don't really understand what's going on. And that is true as well. Now, getting on over to the world of political correctness, apparently up in Washington State, they're giving parents a new option on birth certificates. There's the usual M for male and F for female, and right in between them is a new option labeled simply X. And that's for parents who aren't really sure their brand new baby is male or female, regardless of the anatomy. So they'll just mark that down. I think that's utterly ridiculous. How would you even know what gender? I mean, the baby's mind isn't even formed yet. They don't really start, ticking, so to speak, until at least a year and a half, when those myelin sheaths finish, insulating portions of the brain. You start to see the beginnings of the emergence of personality. The parents cannot know. But we're going to be politically correct and allow parents who are just really messed up by all this political correct propaganda and gender fluidity to really set up their own kid for a royal messing around with in the future. And I think it's ridiculous. This idea, that our gender is not determined by our bodies. I mean, certainly when I was young, that was it. If you've got one kind of plumbing, you're a guy. If you've got another kind of plumbing, you're a girl. That was it. Nobody ever asked about it. Nobody ever questioned that. I think a lot of these people who want to be change their gender are actually they're dealing with their own self-hate. For whatever reason, they cannot stand themselves, and they think changing into something else is going to make their problems go away, and they usually don't. I read a story a few days ago about apparently a very young man who became a woman and found out it didn't, in fact, make his life better. It made it worse. Now he wants to go back to being a guy. All this proselytizing by the transgender movement, it's not helping kids find a resolution to their questions. It's confusing them. They're literally being encouraged to be confused over gender. And that is, of course, the objective for the New World Order. Keep us all confused. Keep us unsure about who we are, where we come from, what bathroom that we use. Now, apparently over at the Vista del Lago High School in Folsom, students have been told that they can't chant USA, USA, USA at sporting events. And as you know, it's a popular way for students to show pride during sporting events and rallies. But the school and district officials are now saying you can't do that because it might come across as intolerant and offensive to all these refugees and immigrants that are attending the school. Well, again, going back to what Teddy Roosevelt said, if you're coming to this country, welcome, but understand you're living in this country. Now, the American people have a right to wave their flag if they are so inclined. They have a right to cheer USA, USA if they are so inclined. It's protected by freedom of speech. And those people who are coming into this country across the borders need to understand they're not in their home country any longer. And they have to adjust and assimilate to the reality of life in the United States, where we have the American flag and we chant USA at rallies. And if it's really that offensive to you, you are free to go home. So apparently this decision by the school administrators has caused quite a bit of a ruckus and a controversy, with the parents out there saying, tell us what is wrong with cheering for our country. What is so wrong about that? All right, we're going to start with Randy in Illinois. I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
This will be real quick, Mike. You know, with what's going on in the country and after the election and the hurricanes, you remember that old Greek saying that goes something like, those whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad?
Yes.
I don't know. It kind of seems like we are there.
Well, our leadership does seem to be, and I think there's another variation of the quote, those whom the gods would destroy, they first make arrogant. And that's certainly true.
I can believe that one.
That is certainly true. All right,
right.
Randy, thanks for the call. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with another phone call. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And during the commercial break, I did take a look for the quotes, and both are valid. Those whom the gods would destroy, they first make proud, which is another way of saying arrogant, is attributed to Sophocles. And the other version, those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad, is attributed to Euripides, but nobody's really sure that it originated with him because it sort of appeared in the mid-1800s. But either one will work. I think making somebody proud and arrogant before you destroy them only increases the suffering. If you make them mad, they're too crazy to know what's going on. Let's go back to the phones here. Robin in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Let me kick this off. The one guy was saying how he saw Napolitano on TV saying how Comey leaked some memos and it wasn't against any laws. But neither is Russian collusion, according to what we've been told either. And look what that's turned into, right?
Well, they haven't found anything. I mean, there's
well, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
They say there's no such crime as colluding. Basically, that's the bottom line. And look what this has turned into. You know what I mean?
Well, so, if in fact Russia had broken into the DNC emails and leaked them out, that would be seen as definite collusion. If Russia had interfered with the election, that would be grounds for Hillary to sue and reverse the results of the election. But we're 9 months along, and they haven't found anything. And Mueller is just on a fishing expedition. He's going everywhere he can, talking to anybody. He has yet to actually find something that adds up to a criminal action, let alone an impeachable offense. And meanwhile, everybody in Washington, D.C. is just looking the other way and whistling in the wind at all the felony violations of Title 18 Hillary Clinton has committed. And what's really amazing is you'd think somebody who was at that much risk of being prosecuted for espionage would just shut up and stop being an annoyance, and she's gone the other way. She's out there, bashing everybody on her book tour, and I really do think she's lost her reality license.
Well, it's awake Americans will know that if they had anything on Trump to begin with, it would have came out during the campaign or If they had anything with this Russian story, it would have came out a very, very long time ago. There's no way that such an investigation would take this long and still not have anything and still expect to find something.
Oh, you remember?
That's not why I called.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you remember during the campaign where they found out Donald Trump's father had been arrested at a KKK rally like 2 years before he was born? And they didn't even say he was part of the rally. He just happened to be there when the cops showed up. And that was all that they could find. And these major newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times detailed dedicated squads of something like 30 different reporters to go on out and try and find dirt on Donald Trump. And they couldn't. All they could come up with was that ginned up dodgy dossier about Trump and the prostitutes in Russia. And it really is. I imagine they're getting very, very angry about all of this. We're going to take a break for station identification. Did you have more you wanted to share with us?
If I could, please.
All right, well, then stay on the phone. I'm going to come back to you after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're talking with Rob in Illinois. And it is very frustrating to see how politicized the investigations, the hatchet jobs are being. We're very clearly seeing our second FBI director in a row who doesn't want to look under that Clinton rock. We're seeing our second attorney general in a row that absolutely does not want to be looking at where the problems really lie because they want to hang on to their own jobs. And on the day when that narcocracy at the heart of our federal government is exposed to the general population, on the day when they look at it and are unable to deny it's real, that's basically going to be the end of the show. And we'll have our Soviet Union-style collapse of the federal government.
Well, it is a shame about the DOJ and Sessions. We had high hopes for this guy, and there's obviously something wrong with him, and he's not only towing the company line, he's furthering it, as he gets into all that new seizure stuff, and it's basically criminal.
I agree.
We have to admit right now that the Democrats, we have to admit this, the Democrats and Republicans, there's a thin line between them. I think, as you probably even mentioned, how many times?
Yes.
They're one and the same at this point. The Republicans
they're
are not
politicians. Helping. They're all politicians, and they act like politicians.
Yeah, they're not helping Trump. They're not helping us. They're towing this globalist type of line that's heading to the socialist communist agenda that they want. And they're all involved with it. They all see high hopes for themselves and so on. So they're very desperate. Mueller, the council he's put together, many of those people, 12 or more of those are professional hit job makers. I mean, they're there. They set people up. They, put people through the ringer. There's no crime. Don't make a crime and then get people. And they've done that. There's people on there that brought down some of these financial houses in the past, and I can't come up with the names at this point. But you were talking about the foreign agent stuff with Sputnik and Russia Today.
Yes.
That ties into they're going after, let's see here. This whole thing, they're trying to tie Russia into getting into the social media and so on and so forth. They're trying to not only tie it into media outlets, like independent media outlets, but they're also trying to tie it to social media, which goes to the Facebook story last week where Zuckerberg comes out and volunteers at some Russian agency bought $100,000 in ads. So he puts this out there as a plant. I can't believe it's even true. What's $100,000 in advertising going to do for anybody? You know what I mean?
Agreed.
So he's tying this into social media. So now they're going after literally everybody that's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it, that is a pro-Trump supporter. And they're just any average Joe, John down the street, Sally down the street, doesn't matter. If you have a pro-Trump, I support Trump, I support America, they're looking into them as foreign agents and Russian agents as well. That's the whole. This is the streamline they're taking. I'm sure you come across the articles. There's a whole bunch.
Oh
of them.
Yeah, I have. And basically, what it is they're trying to figure out some way that they can demonize and shut down the independent media and alternative voices without somebody saying, "Hey, we've got the First Amendment here." And we're seeing all these people who are in Congress saying, well, really, free speech needs to be reined on in. Well, once you do that, it's no longer free speech. It's approved speech. It's permitted speech. And they're trying to exploit this whole white supremacist issue to make it look like regular Americans with a conservative point of view are all of a sudden now the enemy. Remember when the Washington Post declared a whole bunch of blogs arms of Russian propaganda, including mine, for which I was very, very proud, and then they had to retract the article. Right now, the government is waking up and realizing that they have lost the ability to lie to the public with impunity. And if they don't have that, they can't function. They can't sell us any more wars. They can't sell us any more tax increases. They can't sell us anything. And I think, in a way, Donald Trump, by betraying his backers and supporters from last year on so many issues, has really hammered home the point that, Americans really have lost control of the government. When you look at all the massive election fraud that's going on out there, when you look at the statements issued by the Democratic leadership during that lawsuit down in Florida saying, well, no, of course we have the right to select the nominee, and the Democratic voters, they're just there to give us money. But yet they went through the exercise of having a primary election and just ignored the results to award it to Hillary Clinton. So people are really picking up on the fact our system is really corrupted. Hopelessly so, irretrievably so, irredeemably so, unrepentantly so. And I think, again, people just need to stop doing what the government wants you to do. Don't fill out the paperwork. Don't follow the signs. Don't do everything. Just peaceful, nonviolent, non-cooperation with the government. And that's the way Gandhi did it, and it did work.
Well, I'm relating this Mueller, what he's doing with the social media and everything, to McCarthyism.
Yes.
Except in the difference is McCarthy actually targeted specific people in Hollywood and so on and so forth, and which he was redeemed. Years later, he was redeemed. That the people he was actually pointing out to be communists and Marxists were actually communists and Marxists, even though back then they made him sound like a Fruit Loop because he was, he was just a human being and he had flaws, and the way he was going about it just seemed like, you're crazy, and all these people got blacklisted, but years later, he's redeemed.
Well, now hang on. They've tried to say that he was redeemed, but what the blacklisting in Hollywood was all about, at the end of World War II, Hollywood had just done yeoman's service in making movies that supported the American entry into World War II, demonized the Nazis, demonized the Japanese, and everybody was happy the war was over. And then all of a sudden, these spooks start coming down to the studios in Hollywood saying, well, now we need you to make movies that demonize the Russians because they're going to be the new enemy. And there were people in Hollywood who said, wait a minute, they were our allies in World War II. They're our friends. And those people in Hollywood who refused to start making Russia-bashing movies, those people were the targets of Joseph McCarthy and his House Committee on Un-American Activities. And they were basically pruning out of Hollywood anybody who had any idea of staying an independent thinker. And that's what the whole McCarthy blacklisting was all about. And they blacklisted some very important people. Some were permanently ruined. Some managed to get their careers back in the end. But there were a lot of people, they weren't really communists or Marxists. They were aware of some of the deficiencies of capitalism, and that was used to basically tarnish them. McCarthy couldn't get up there and say, we're destroying this person's career because they won't lie to you about Russia, but that was the real agenda. And today, again, it's not communist, it's anti-Semite. That is the tarnishing device, the scarlet letter, if you will, that's used to destroy careers.
Okay, I'll have to polish up on that because I heard that a lot of those people were part of the Communist Party and so on. That's what I heard in the end.
Well, some of them may have been and may not have been, but that wasn't the real issue. The real issue was a purge of the movie-making industry, of anybody who might push back against the government directing what films were being made, what TV shows are being made. We had an article earlier in this week about how the relationship between Hollywood and the government is a lot closer than most people have ever realized. And again, I saw these spooks all over the studios when I was out there working. And ultimately, in the end, these were the people who arranged for my career to be destroyed when I started saying that Vincent Foster did not commit suicide, that it was an impossibility. And all of a sudden, boom, my career was gone. They did the same thing to Gene Seberg in the 1960s. All it took was one bogus BS article planted in the Los Angeles Times by their gossip columnist, whose name is Joyce Haber. That was it. And destroyed a career, drove her to suicide. That's how they work.
Well, it's one thing they do was not only do they kill very well, they tell lies very well, and that's what Hillary's doing right now. She's trying to rewrite history. That's why she's out there saying all these lies. She's trying to actually make people believe that this is actually what happened, because now how many people are going to go back 6, 9 months, a year ago to remember all this? Because Americans have a very short-term memory. That's the problem, and Hillary's out there telling everybody a new story. And that's, again, what they do real well is tell lies. I'll leave you with this. I sent you an email. I can't verify the validity of the website because it's brand new to me. I just came across the articles. One is about Trump slamming Bernie Sanders about his single-payer system, and another one where now the Wiener's lawyers are coming out saying he was targeted with his sexting gambit because to influence the presidential election. I don't know the validity of them, but they just came out this afternoon.
All right. I don't see it right now, but I'll definitely make a point of looking for that, okay?
All right. Take care. Thank you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are now empty, and we're going to get back to the news. Apparently, first of all, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network. Apparently, the U.S. has deployed B-52s over Afghanistan. They're back to this carpet bombing strategy again to basically push back the people of Afghanistan and say, you will love your U.S. appointed puppet ruler. So, now, interestingly enough, the U.S. House of Representatives adopted 3 amendments directly challenging civil forfeiture. Now, as you know, more and more states are trying to pass limits on civil forfeiture, saying that at the very least you have to be convicted of a crime before the police can confiscate your property. And up until recently, the idea is the police just going to take your money or your property just on a suspicion. And you have to go to court and prove that you acquired that money or that property legitimately. It's a return to Code Napoleon. You are presumed guilty until you can prove your innocence. And it's been abused all over the country so that police departments can make up the shortfalls in their budgets coming from tax revenues. Well, a lot of people have been hurt by this, a lot of innocent people. And so several states have already passed these laws saying that you can't just grab their wealth. They have to be convicted of a crime of sufficient magnitude to warrant being treated like they violated RICO. You can't take their money because they were convicted of jaywalking or something like that. You have to actually have a crime involving the property, then you can seize it. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been fighting back on that, saying, no, we need to leave the civil forfeiture laws exactly the way they are, where if the cops even suspect you're doing something wrong, you can be deprived of your property without due process. And by the way, you need to read that Fifth Amendment. There's a lot of stuff in there. There is, of course, the idea that you are not, you cannot be coerced to be an evidence against yourself. That's what most people think the Fifth Amendment is. But there's some additional stuff in there, and you need to read it. And one of them is that the government will not deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process. And some cops suspecting that you might be on your way to buy a bale of Pacololo is not due process. So the House of Representatives is standing up to Jeff Sessions, and I think it's about time, because all of us know somebody who have been burned in this. Under these civil forfeiture laws, the police are stealing more from law-abiding Americans than the burglars, muggers, and thieves all put together. And it really is time for that to come to an end. Because right now we're living in a society where you have these police officers are like Sir Guy of Gisborne's tax collectors. They're just riding all over Sherwood Forest and Nottingham, just grabbing whatever they want whenever they want. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the week, There's a bill that is going through Congress that will fund the U.S. intelligence agencies, presumably all 17 of them. And it has this section 623, sense of Congress on WikiLeaks. And they're saying it is the sense of Congress that WikiLeaks and the senior leadership of WikiLeaks resemble a non-state hostile intelligence service, often abetted by state actors, and should be treated as such a service by the United States. Now, notice the very careful language there. It is the sense of Congress, meaning they can't prove it. We've just decided this is what makes sense to us, even though it is absurd. But this is part of the continuing attack on anybody who is not reading from the approved script. Because the government has lost the ability to lie to the American people with impunity, and now they're finding out that's a problem. They can't sell us new wars. In the age of the internet and the independent media, the life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer. Contrast that with the John F. Kennedy assassination, where it took something like 30 years to reach the point where half of Americans understood that the Warren report was a complete fiction. So now they're trying to find a way to bring censorship to the United States, even though we have a First Amendment guaranteeing our right to freedom of speech. We're seeing censorship by the main social media platforms. Now, in my book, that Bill of Rights is an absolute. What it says, it means. We don't need to massage it. We don't need to adjust it to the new society. That Bill of Rights, that Constitution, those are the original contracts with America. And any government that is not fully compliant with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is not a legal, legitimate government, and we all have to start acting like that. We're under occupation by a Vichy government that rules this nation on behalf of a foreign power. And the people of Syria didn't like that. The people of Yemen didn't like that. The people of Libya didn't like it. The people of Iraq didn't like that. Why should we be any more comfortable with it than they are? So now the Congress wants to pass a law that will say it's okay to try and block out WikiLeaks because they're a non-state hostile intelligence service. All that means is WikiLeaks is telling the truth about things you need to know about. So are all the independent media. We're here to give you the information you need to have to make good choices. And that, of course, is very terrifying to Washington, D.C., which has built their entire image on the basis of this illusion of lie after lie after lie after lie throughout the decades. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, and on and on and on. And as more and more Americans realize the extent we're being lied to, they're looking back at everything else we've ever been told by the corporate media or the state-controlled schools, and they're starting to review that. And once you accept the fact that you are being lied to by the government and the corporate media, the lies become actually quite easy to spot. Because you don't just read them in and memorize them and recite them back out. You start thinking about what you're seeing. Does it really make sense that things happen the way you were told they did? And that's a very healthy process to be going through. I remember when Jim Garrison put Clay Shaw on trial as being part of the Kennedy assassination. And he was acquitted because they planted a bad witness on him. But the jury came on out saying they were convinced that Garrison was right. There had been a conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. They just weren't convinced Clay Shaw was part of it. And Clay Shaw had nothing to say about it because he conveniently died very shortly after he was acquitted. But I remember watching the Garrison trial. And I had saved all these magazines from the JFK assassination. I've always had the instincts of a librarian or archivist. And I pulled them out, and for the first time I really looked at them. And the very obvious mistakes and problems with what they were saying versus what the pictures were showing just leapt out at me. And I have a whole page dedicated to that under my JFK section. I was blinded to what was in front of me by my faith in a government that was always going to be truthful with me and a corporate media that would always honestly reveal to me what I needed to know. And there in my hands was the evidence. No, I had been lied to. And you're being lied to. And you should be angry. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Very alarming development here. I'm looking on Fox News where Rex Tillerson is out there declaring that Iran is now in breach of the nuclear deal. And he's trying to make the case that Iran's construction of long-range missiles violates the P5+1. No, it doesn't. P5+1 was all about nuclear materials. There was nothing in there about missiles. And remember, the IAEA, only a couple of weeks ago, did their usual inspection on Iran and said Iran is fully in compliance with the P5+1. So this is the new big lie. Iran has breached the deal. They're making missiles. They're launching cyber attacks. They're doing all this bad stuff. You have to hate them and be ready to fling your children onto the Iranian bayonets. Have we not seen this so many times before? We saw it with the run-up to Iraq about Saddam Hussein is evil, Assad is evil. It's a standard pattern. Demonize the leader, demonize the country, dehumanize the population. Come up with slang words that dehumanize the population, like slants or hajis or whatever. So they're definitely getting ready to do that. Apparently, North Korea went ahead and fired a test missile. Still waiting for some details on what that is all about. But again, North Korea announced it's a test missile. And North Korea, like any other nation on Earth, does have an inherent right to self-defense and a deterrent. And like I said earlier in the week, Russia test-fired an ICBM from Plesetsk. U.S. test fires missiles all the time. Nobody calls it provocative or a danger to world peace. It's North Korea. He's bad and he's evil and people dress funny over there. It's the same pattern we saw. Every time the U.S. government wants to go after somebody, they demonize them. The corporate media's job is to make them look inferior and evil and deserving of white-hot flaming death. So, looks like we may be getting two wars, North Korea and Iran. Getting on back to the Equifax data breach, and apparently the reason they got breached was they missed a patch that closed a security hole, and apparently they had 9 working weeks in which to apply the patch prior to the breach, and they didn't. And somebody got in. Now, as is always the event, or always the case when you have a major event, the scammers are already out in force. I got an email earlier today saying that Equifax has set up a call center to find out if you have been infected. And I was leery about the whole thing. They had a toll-free number in the 866 area. So I went on over to Equifax and found out there is a call center, but it's a different number than the one that went out in this mass emailing. And so what they're trying to do is you call that number and you'll get somebody who says, you know, Equifax loss reporting center or whatever, and they will ask you for your information so they can look you up in their files. It's a phishing operation. It's a phishing operation. So, a lot of people are now reacting to the debut of the iPhone. And again, a lot of laughter when the 3D facial map security feature failed to work. A lot of people are very concerned that that's actually going to lead to cases where criminals will take the person with the phone to unlock it, or possibly just part of the person's anatomy. Another area of concern is people who want to withhold their passwords for their phone. The police can just grab their face and hover it over the phone, and the phone will unlock. So, good idea, wasn't thought all the way through. France is expressing dismay that the cost of the new iPhone is an entire month's wage at France's minimum wage. It is too expensive. I don't think it's going to take off. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're getting more information about the North Korean missile test. Apparently it was a long-range missile, was launched from near Pyongyang, and flew over Japan and has landed somewhere downrange. Japan hit the panic button. Everybody shelter in place. It's not like Japan doesn't get overflown every single day by jetliners and missiles and satellites. This is just more of the theater to say bad North Korea, bad North Korea, bad North Korea. But people are apparently being warned to avoid touching anything that might be missile debris. Well, given the range involved, I don't think people need to worry about anything. That if I just waited long enough, some of that foam insulation from the Space Shuttle external tanks was likely to wash up here because they were dropping those things in the Pacific not too far from here. But I never found anything that was convincingly part of that insulating foam. All right, we're back talking with about computers. There was a while back where naturalnews.net basically blew the whistle on this magazine article, Are You Depressed? And the idea was people reading the magazine would take this survey to see if they were depressed. And the survey was rigged in such a way that no matter how you answered the questions, it would still come out saying, you are clinically depressed and you need to talk to your doctor about buying blah, 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 blah. Well, it was a big stink, and that hasn't stopped the pharmaceutical companies from updating their methodology. Because, as you know, last month, Google released a self-assessment quiz called the Patient Health Questionnaire 9. And basically, if you type any search query that has the word depressed in it, this will pop up as a result. And it turns out that this whole depression tool, this Patient Health Questionnaire 9, was funded by Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. And it's a very sneaky way to try and get you on prescription antidepressants. And you don't want to go there unless you really, really need them. Let's take a phone call. Ernest in Nevada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, you were talking about the conditioning of the public by the media, something that's been going on a long time, and the only way you can get people to turn around 180 degrees from the way that they thought, say, 50 years ago in one generation, is the deliberate, ongoing propaganda. And I remember, back in the 80s, you have these Law and Order shows, and they still play them, where it seems like every episode, the perpetrators were those that, in cases of social justice now, that the evil militant militias, the evil male chauvinists, and it seems like that's where people got their idea of, to follow the relativism way of thinking, their values.
Yes.
And that's how they were able to turn around this generation of young people now to think that way.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, Hollywood and television are completely controlled by the intelligence agencies, and somewhere there is a master plan on how do we take these previously independently minded sovereign American people, and how do we transform them into a mass that we can invade other people's countries with?
I seriously doubt that's going to happen. You remember how after Vietnam or during Vietnam, how the military was really seen in a bad light with the media. I mean, all the movies that came out, like Platoon, showing all the evils that American troops did. And then around the early 90s, the honorable and brave in defending our country. Private Ryan, we were soldiers. And I remember thinking, wow, that's amazing. All of a sudden, now, they're good guys. And then sure enough, 2001 happens, which tells me, they know something's going to happen. They start making the movies in a way that's going to condition our people to accept what's going to come down the road. And today, like we see Kiefer Sutherland is coming back at his character, the 24 character, terrorism guy. And then we have this movie coming out, I think it's called American Spy, where the hero is like one of these 20-somethings, like you see at the coffee shops with a bun or something, and this guy's going to go out and become like an American assassin to kill terrorists. If you look, like you said, if you look for it, it's easy to see.
Well, yeah, and having worked in Hollywood, I'm aware of how much of that kind of thing goes on here. But again, when they finally did another follow-up Indiana Jones movie, who were the bad guys? The Russians. The Russians were the bad guys. And again, yes, very often you get a sense of what is going to be going on by looking at current movies and TV shows. And Claire and I were noticing just the other day on the cable box, on the index, on the list, all kinds of war movies. And they're all, again, like you said, they're the movies where the Americans are the good guys and, the other people are the bad guys. And it's really shocking to see the latest edition of the Superman comic book, because I grew up with Superman comics. Everybody did. And to see this idea where Superman is now protecting illegal immigrants from Americans, and the Americans are being portrayed in the worst possible light. They've got an American flag as a bandana. They're shooting endangered species. I mean, it's really ridiculous, and it's heavy-handed. But for the young, impressionable mind, yeah, this stuff does convey a message that the government wants to have. Remember, at the end of World War II, as part of Operation Paperclip, the U.S. government grabbed a lot of these people who worked at the Nazis' Ministry for Propaganda, and they brought them to the U.S., and said, you teach us how you did all of this, and we'll let you have a really good life here. That's where the MK program came from originally, was German, where MK were the initials for the German version of mind control. And the CIA basically said, we're going to make it even better, so it's MK Ultra. And then they opened up that sadomasochistic bondage parlor in San Francisco for 9 years, which is, I imagine, a heck of a job there. Very often the corporate media is sort of showing the way. They're selling an idea. We're still seeing all over the media, they're still pushing global warming, even on the so-called science channels. It's all about pushing the agenda. And I'm starting to understand these people who say, I just want to turn off the TV. I'm tired of being lied to. And Claire and I don't watch that much TV anymore. It's mostly we do watch the news to see what they're lying about today. And we will watch some of the shows like Expedition Unknown, and we know that a lot of that is being cheated, but it's still a lot of fun to watch. But it really is disappointing to see how badly modern Hollywood has been co-opted. Are you still there, Ernest? No, I guess we lost him. All right. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, as you know, earlier this week, we had this huge level of solar activity, X-class flares, and it was strangely high levels because actually the sun is supposed to be at its solar minimum, which is where the point in the solar cycle where flare activity should be at its lowest. And it is a reminder that we have not been able to study the sun long enough to really know that much about it. We've only been able to scientifically study the sun for about 100 years. And so we know about the 11-year sunspot cycle, the 22-year magnetic cycle. Russian scientists are saying they seem to be seeing indications of a 60-year and possibly a slightly longer than 100-year cycle. And all of these cycles are hitting the low points right now, but we don't know what happens. And all of a sudden, these flares, they just came out of nowhere. And it's kind of fun to be living in a universe that still has an occasional surprise. Now, up in Canada, they're now investigating climate denial. That if you question the most holy revealed dogma, that human activity is changing the climate, you can be in serious, serious trouble. And apparently, there were 3 organizations that are accused of denying mainstream climate science, meaning Al Gore's propaganda. There was a complaint from an environmental group. They don't say which one, they just say that these were ratted out. Well, again, I have a saying that I've normally used in another context, and it applies equally here. Truth needs no law to protect it. Truth survives examination. Truth survives questioning. Truth welcomes review. Throughout history, from Galileo to Zundel, only lies and liars resort to the courts to enforce adherence to a dogma. And that's exactly what's going on here. The whole global warming movement, and now they've gone back to calling it climate change, even though the focus is still on taxing carbon. The science has fallen apart. It's not there. They have been caught and scandalized rigging the data, or simply destroying the raw data so that there's no reproducibility possible. The attitude coming out of the climate movement is, we're scientists, we have clipboards, we have white laboratory coats, how dare you doubt anything that we would say? Well, we do doubt anything scientists say, because scientists are just as easy to corrupt as politicians and clergy. That's why the scientific method emphasizes reproducibility, because that's how you weed out the hoaxes from reality. And if you're coming on to me and you're saying, I got this pretty chart here that says the earth is getting warmer and it's all your fault, and I can't look at the raw evidence you use to come to that conclusion and verify it for myself, then we're not talking science, we're talking propaganda and politics. And because so much of the global warming myth has already fallen apart, now we're seeing them attempt to criminalize it. Jail climate deniers, just like they want to jail Holocaust deniers. And all such activities do is underscore the fact there is a big secret being kept there. Now, apparently, earlier this week, Monday, they had a major storm over San Francisco that resulted more than 800 lightning strikes in just a few hours. This is coming out of the National Weather Service. So that was definitely intense. And of course, I love a good thunderstorm. I love taking pictures of lightning. Claire is the opposite direction. She wants to put in the earplugs and not listen to it. But it's nature's fireworks. And especially now that they're taking away our fireworks here, we just get our jollies someplace else. Now then, we've mentioned this once before, but we think probably it's worth another mention here. Research conducted at Lomonosov Moscow State University has found that sunscreen ingredients, when exposed to chlorine in swimming pool water, transform into cancer-causing chemicals. In short, sunscreen plus chlorinated swimming pool water is a binary weapon that produces cancer-causing chemicals right on your skin as you are swimming. And the chemicals created in this process have been linked not only to cancer, but to infertility and immune system damage. So they just put this stuff out there. They're not really, if it doesn't kill a lab animal in the first 30 days, we're just going to say that it's safe here. Now, down in Chiapas in southern Mexico, in the town of San Cristobal de las Casas, the water is disappearing from the aquifer. And their wells are drying up. They're having to walk great distances to get water or buy their water in bottled water. And everybody's saying, what the heck is going on? Well, it turns out Coca-Cola has a bottling plant in between San Felipe and San Cristobal, and it's operated by the Mexican company FEMSA, and this plant consumes over 1 million liters of water per day, and that's where the water is going. And Coca-Cola has come under tremendous hostility in many places around the world where they'll set up a bottling plant and they will just grab all the water and leave everybody else parched and dry, unable to irrigate their plants. And is this wise management by the government? No, of course not. The government should make sure everybody is getting an equal share of the water that needs it. Now, interestingly enough, when Claire and I first moved here to Hawaii, all we got on the news all the time was, oh, there's a water shortage, you got to conserve, restrictors on the shower, a bottle of water in the toilet so you're using less water. And then all of a sudden, a huge block of agricultural land in the middle of the island was sold for redevelopment. They bulldozed all the crops and started building up condos, and all of a sudden the water shortage went away. And it became very obvious that the state government was shouting water shortage to try and keep the majority of the available water going to the big agricultural corporations. And once they had shut down and gone elsewhere, the problem just magically went away. But at least they were trying to keep a balance. In the case of these Coca-Cola plants, they have literally resulted in entire neighboring areas being without any water whatsoever. And there really ought to be a control over that. And I know that people don't want to drink the Coca-Cola where they need to drink water because if it's got the real sugar in it, that's going to dehydrate you more. It's not really rehydration with the flavoring and the sugar. And, of course, if it's got the aspartame, that's also bad for you. So Coca-Cola is a treat. It's a recreational drink. It's not something that's going to really help sustain your life. Now, apparently, Hillary Clinton is still out there on her Sour Grapes tour. And she's still out there saying that, why are people still blaming her for Benghazi? And she hasn't changed her mind about what happened back there on September 11th, 2012, when the attack happened. And remember, yesterday it came on out that security was so poor at that consulate, they'd brought in a new contractor just 2 weeks before the attack, and after the attack, the contractor was told not to say a word about the previous poor security. We'll be right back with the last segment of our program. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're hearing more information about North Korea. They fired this missile from Pyongyang over the Japanese island of Hokkaido. That's the northernmost island in the main Japanese archipelago. So this was a missile of significant range. We don't know where it came down yet. Everybody's already out there screaming, more sanctions, more sanctions, more sanctions. How dare North Korea test their missiles? And again, it is sheer, utter hypocrisy and a double standard because Russia earlier this week tested an ICBM out of Plesetsk. Nobody called them provocative or put sanctions on them. The U.S. is testing missiles all the time out of Vandenberg and here at the Pacific Missile Test Range over on Kauai. Nobody calls them provocative and starts screaming about sanctions. This is just part of that standard demonize everything a designated enemy does in order to sell the idea that they have to be invaded. Now then, getting on back to what's happening up in New Hampshire with the election fraud. Apparently, this was all started by Project Veritas. And you'll probably remember that during the run-up to the election, Project Veritas was making these wonderful movies where the cameras were hidden. These were undercover movies that were made of Hillary supporters and Democrat supporters just openly violating, ignoring campaign laws. And apparently they got one about just how easy it was for somebody from out of state to walk in and vote on Election Day. And apparently this video was sent to New Hampshire Secretary of State, who initiated the investigation and said, how many of these people who voted with a Massachusetts license have since acquired a New Hampshire state driver's license? And that's when they found out there were 6,000 people. And Hillary won New Hampshire from Donald Trump by only about 2,000 votes. And so at this point, it is very obvious Hillary's people stole New Hampshire from Donald Trump. And the implications are huge. Because if it's that blatant in New Hampshire, if it's that blatant with all the illegal immigrants and dead people voting, then it is a nationwide scandal. And one of the big lies the corporate media likes to shove at you is every time you come up with evidence of election fraud, they'll say, oh, well, of course, yeah, there may have been something irregular there, but it didn't change the outcome. And that's a ridiculous statement for them to make. They can't possibly justify making that statement, because if you find any evidence of election fraud, you cannot claim that that's the only election fraud that took place. And somebody who's intending to steal election, they're going to have enough fraud out there to actually accomplish it. So when the talking heads at the corporate media say it didn't change the outcome of the election, it is total bovine excrement. And they should know better, because they don't know how much fraud was going on. They're just trying to dismiss and trivialize the fact that somebody got caught somewhere. So this is a serious matter, and I'm glad that Trump's Commission on Election Integrity is getting on top of this, because we need a complete changeover of the entire election system. We have to follow Virginia's example. We have got to get rid of these electronic voting machines, because they're wide open to fraud and tampering. All right, there's the music. It is time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Oh, by the way, it is snowing in Montana, for all you global warming people. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller's program. He's got lots of interesting things to share with you. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha with the lovely Lady Claire. Aloha, America.